Welcome to Midnight Chronicles, where the darkest stories come to life just before you drift to sleep. Let us know what part of the world are you watching this from and at what time. Tonight, we'll take you on a journey through the strange, dark, mysterious, and the terrifying. That's what this channel is all about, and if you are into these kind of stuff, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We post fresh new content 3 to 4 times a week. Now, let's begin with today's story. The Appalachian wilderness stretched endlessly before them, untouched and raw. The 4 friends, Mike, Rachel, Liam, and Jessica, were exhilarated to finally be here. Black Hollow was far off the beaten path, a trail so rarely traversed that it had practically fallen off maps. It was the perfect challenge for their annual hiking trip. Mike, the group leader and a self-proclaimed expert outdoorsman, had spent weeks planning their route. Rachel, cautious and methodical, carried the maps and emergency supplies. Jessica was there for the experience, snapping pictures of everything and updating her blog with captions like, "Living my best life in the wild." Liam, always the clown, was the group's morale booster and keeping spirits high. "I heard this place is cursed," Liam teased as they set out. "Some old local legend about a monster that lives here, eats hikers who wander off the trail." "Sounds like a campfire story," Mike said, shrugging. Rachel frowned. "I read something online about people going missing out here, though. A few disappearances over the years." Jessica rolled her eyes. "People go missing in national parks all the time. It's called getting lost." Still, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows crept in, Rachel couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. The first day passed uneventfully, the group covering good ground and making camp near a bubbling creek. That night, under a blanket of stars, they sat around the fire and laughed over their usual banter. But as the fire burned low, Rachel noticed something odd. The forest had gone silent. "No crickets," she said, her voice low. "No frogs. No nothing." The others paused, listening. Liam broke the tension with a grin. "Maybe they're scared of us. Ever think of that? But..." Rachel couldn't shake the sense that they were the ones being watched. The next morning they found something disturbing. About 100 feet from their campsite, they stumbled upon a deer carcass. It had been ripped apart, its ribcage exposed, organs scattered across the ground. Flies buzzed around the scene. "Damn," Jessica said, snapping a photo. "Nature's brutal." Rachel knelt, inspecting the ground. "These aren't wolf tracks," she murmured. The footprints around the body were massive, clawed, and bipedal. Liam leaned over her shoulder. "So, Bigfoot then?" "Not funny," Rachel snapped. Mike's jaw tightened. "It's probably a bear. Let's keep moving." By midday, the dense canopy of trees blotted out much of the sunlight, plunging the forest into an eerie twilight. Every step seemed harder than the last, the air growing oppressively thick. The group's usual chatter had dwindled into uneasy silence, each of them increasingly aware of how isolated they were. Rachel frowned as she studied the GPS. The device's screen flickered, glitching erratically, before shutting off entirely. She slapped it in frustration, but the display remained dark. "Great," she muttered. "What's wrong?" Jessica asked, pausing to take a sip from her water bottle. "The GPS is dead," Rachel said, "and the map isn't adding up. We should have reached the ridge by now." Mike stepped closer, looking at the map she held. His brow furrowed. "This doesn't make sense. If we were following the trail markers, we should be here," he pointed to a spot on the map. "But this incline doesn't match." Liam leaned over, grinning nervously. "Maybe the map's just old. Trails change, right?" Rachel shook her head. "Not like this. It's like we're somewhere else." Jessica glanced around, her expression uneasy. "You're making it sound like we're lost." "Relax," Mike said, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "We just need to head north. Worst case, we camp for the night and retrace our steps tomorrow." But as they pressed on, the forest seemed to close in around them. The underbrush grew thicker, the trees twisted and gnarled, the familiar trail markers were gone, replaced by strange claw-like gouges in the bark. Rachel stopped abruptly. "Wait, do you hear that?" The others paused, listening. "What?" Liam asked, his voice unusually subdued. "Nothing," Rachel whispered. "There's no sound, no birds, no wind, no insects, nothing." The realization hit them all at once. The oppressive silence wasn't natural. It was as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Jessica shivered. "I don't like this. This whole place feels wrong." Mike turned, his frustration boiling over. "We're fine, okay? We just need to keep moving." "Fine," Rachel snapped. "We're completely off course. The GPS is dead, and the map doesn't match." "Tell me how that's fine." Before Mike could respond, Liam let out a startled yelp. "Guys, look at this." They turned to see him crouched near the ground, pointing at something. It was a series of massive footprints, embedded deep in the soft earth. Each print was over a foot long, with claw marks extending from the toes. "What the hell?" Jessica whispered. Mike's confidence wavered. "It's probably a bear, a big one." Rachel knelt beside the tracks, her face pale. "Bears don't walk like this. These are bipedal." Liam forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. "So what are we saying? Bigfoot? Because if this is some elaborate prank, I'm not laughing." Jessica snapped a photo of the tracks, her hands trembling. "Whatever made these, it's huge and it's close." The group fell silent, the weight of discovery settling over them like a shroud. "Let's keep moving," Mike said finally, his voice tight. "Staying here isn't an option." As they trudged forward, Rachel tried to ignore the uneasy feeling crawling up her spine. The forest felt alive, watching them. Branches creaked above their heads, though there was no wind. Shadows seemed to shift at the edge of her vision, darting behind trees whenever she turned her head. Jessica suddenly stopped, clutching her arm. "Ow! What's wrong?" Rachel asked. Jessica rolled up her sleeve, revealing 3 thin, parallel scratches along her forearm. "I don't know. It felt like something grabbed me." "Branches," Mike said dismissively. "You probably brushed against something." Jessica shook her head. "No. It felt sharp, deliberate." Rachel exchanged a glance with Mike, but neither said anything. Hours passed, and the sense of unease only grew. The forest became darker, the trees looming taller, their branches forming an almost impenetrable canopy. When they finally reached what should have been an open ridge, they found only more forest. "This can't be right," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "We should be out of this by now." Mike stared at the map, turning it over as if he expected it to change. "It doesn't make any sense." Jessica's voice rose, tinged with panic. "Are you saying we're lost?" "No," Mike said quickly. "We're disoriented. We'll figure it out." But Rachel wasn't listening. She was staring at the trees ahead, her face pale. "What is that?" she whispered. The others followed her gaze. Deep in the shadows, barely visible, was a figure, tall and hunched, its glowing eyes fixed on them. It stood perfectly still, as though it were waiting. "Run!" Rachel breathed. And then it moved. The figure darted behind a tree, faster than anything they had ever seen. The underbrush rustled violently, and the group broke into a panicked sprint, their supplies and arguments forgotten in the chaos. The forest came alive with sound, branches snapping, leaves crunching, and that low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through their very bones. Jessica bounded up the stairs, but the town had stopped, and when they finally stopped, the forest was silent again. Jessica doubled over, gasping. What was that?" I don't know," Mike said, his voice trembling, but Rachel's eyes remained fixed on the darkness. "It's hunting us." Branches snapped in the distance, and the eerie clicking noise had returned, louder and more erratic, echoing through the trees like a macabre metronome. Shadows darted between the trunks, too fast and fleeting to make out. "We need to keep moving," Rachel urged, her voice low but firm. She was gripping the hunting knife she always carried, her knuckles white. Liam, his injured arm hastily wrapped with a bandana, looked pale and shaken. "What if it's still out there? What if it's watching us?" "It is," Rachel said without hesitation, scanning the dark woods. "We have to assume it's hunting us." Jessica let out a strangled sob. "This isn't real. It can't be real. We're just imagining things." Mike turned to her, his frustration boiling over. "Does this," he gestured to Liam's bloodied arm, "look like our imagination?" "Shut up, both of you," Rachel snapped. "We can't afford to fall apart right now." Another branch cracked, this time much closer. The group froze, their eyes darting toward the sound. "Did anyone else see that?" Jessica whispered, pointing with a trembling hand. At first it seemed like she was gesturing at nothing, but then Rachel saw it. A tall, spindly figure moving slowly between the trees. Its limbs were grotesquely long, its shoulders hunched. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, its head cocked at an unnatural angle, as if listening to their fear. The creature stopped, its glowing eyes locking onto them. "Run!" Rachel whispered. Jessica didn't move. She was paralyzed, staring at the creature in horror. "Jessica!" Rachel hissed, grabbing her arm and yanking her forward. The group bolted, plunging deeper into the forest. The sound of heavy footfalls followed close behind, accompanied by guttural growls and that infernal clicking. The thing was faster than it should have been, weaving effortlessly through the trees, its elongated limbs giving it an almost spider-like gait. Liam stumbled over a root and fell hard, crying out in pain. "Help me!" Mike skidded to a stop, doubling back to haul him to his feet. As he did, the creature lunged from the shadows, its claws narrowly missing Mike's back. Rachel turned, her heart hammering. She saw it up close for the first time, a nightmarish blend of human and animal features. Its skin was stretched taut over a skeletal frame, its mouth filled with rows of sharp, jagged teeth. "Move, now!" Rachel shouted, charging forward with her knife. She swung wildly, the blade glinting in the faint moonlight. The creature hissed and recoiled, but it didn't retreat far. "Come on!" she screamed, grabbing Mike and Liam by the arms and dragging them forward. The group ran blindly, their only goal to put as much distance as possible between them and the creature. But the forest seemed to conspire against them. The ground was uneven, the trees so close together that it was impossible to move quickly without stumbling. "Where's the trail?" Jessica cried, tears streaming down her face. "There is no trail," Mike shouted back. The clicking noise returned, louder and more erratic, coming from all directions. It was as if the creature were multiplying, its sounds echoing in a way that disoriented them completely. Rachel stopped abruptly, holding up a hand to silence the group. She turned in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise. "It's hurting us," she realized aloud. "What?" Jessica asked, her voice high-pitched with panic. "It's driving us somewhere," Rachel said, her eyes scanning the darkness. "It's not just chasing us, it's leading us." "No, no, no," Liam muttered, shaking his head. "That's crazy." A deep growl cut through the air, closer than ever. The creature burst from the shadows, its claws slashing through the air. Rachel barely had time to duck as the beast lunged, its teeth snapping inches from her face. "Light!" Rachel shouted. "Does anyone have a light?" Jessica fumbled in her pocket, pulling out a small flashlight. She flicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness and landing squarely on the creature. It screeched, recoiling from the light, its glowing eyes narrowing in fury. "It doesn't like light," Rachel yelled. "Keep it on it!" Jessica shakily held the flashlight steady, the beam trembling as the creature snarled and circled them. "It's not enough," Mike said, his voice tight. "We can't just stand here waiting for it to attack again." Rachel's mind raced. "We have to move. Now. Head for higher ground. Something it can't climb easily." They took off again, the flashlight beam bobbing wildly as Jessica ran. The creature gave chase, its growls echoing through the forest like a predator toying with its prey. Rachel spotted a rocky incline ahead, its surface slick and jagged. "There! Go!" The group scrambled up the rock, slipping and scraping their hands and knees. The creature hesitated at the base, growling low in its throat. For a moment, it seemed like they might have escaped. But then the creature began climbing, its claws digging into the rock with terrifying ease. "It's coming!" Jessica screamed, her flashlight trembling as she pointed it downward. Rachel gritted her teeth, holding the hunting knife tightly. "Keep climbing. Don't stop." As they reached the top of the incline, Rachel turned to face the creature. "Go!" she shouted at the others. "I'll hold it off." "No!" Mike yelled. "We're not leaving you." "Just go!" Rachel snapped. The creature lunged at her, its claws swiping dangerously close. She thrust the knife forward, slashing its forearm. The creature let out an ear-piercing screech, but it didn't retreat. If anything, it seemed angrier. "Rachel, come on!" Jessica screamed from the top of the incline. With a final desperate swing of her knife, Rachel managed to knock the creature off balance. It tumbled back down the rocky slope, landing with a sickening thud. Rachel didn't wait to see if it would get up. She scrambled after the others, her heart pounding as the forest seemed to close in around them. When she reached the top of the incline, she collapsed beside the group, gasping for air. The forest below was eerily silent again, but Rachel knew it wasn't over. "It's not dead," she said, her voice hoarse. "It'll come back." "Then what do we do?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. Rachel looked out over the dark forest, her grip tightening on the knife. "We survived." By dusk, they found refuge in an abandoned cabin, its roof partially collapsed and its interior reeking of mildew and decay. Jessica was hysterical, sobbing uncontrollably. Rachel inspected the cabin. "This place isn't safe. Look at these scratches." The walls were gouged with deep claw marks, and the floor was littered with bones. As night fell, the creature's growls surrounded them. It circled the cabin, its red eyes occasionally visible through the cracks in the walls. They barricaded the doors with broken furniture, but the pounding on the walls grew more intense. The cabin loomed before them, barely visible through the encroaching darkness. Its windows were broken, its wooden exterior warped with age. Vines clung to the walls, and the front door hung askew, creaking on its rusted hinges. Rachel hesitated. What if it's a trap? We don't have a choice, Mike said, his voice hard. We can't keep running all night. They hurried inside, slamming the door shut and pushing a heavy, rotted table against it. The interior of the cabin was worse than the outside. Mold covered the walls. The air was damp and foul, and the floor creaked ominously with every step. Scattered across the room were the remnants of past occupants, a torn backpack, a pair of muddy boots, and what looked like dried blood smeared across the floor. "This isn't a good idea," Jessica whispered, clutching her knees as she sat against the wall. "We're cornered in here." "We're safer in here than out there," Mike snapped, though the doubt in his voice betrayed him. Rachel, ever the pragmatist, began searching the cabin for anything useful. She found an old hunting knife, a box of matches, and what appeared to be a rusted kerosene lamp, still half full. "This might buy us some time," she said, holding the items up. Jessica sniffled. "Time for what? It's going to kill us." Mike knelt beside her, his face grim. But we have to stay calm." Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the cabin. Something heavy had landed on the roof. They froze, staring upward as the sound of claws scraping against the wooden shingles filled the air. "It's on top of us," Rachel whispered, gripping the hunting knife tightly. The creature's growls reverberated through the walls, followed by heavy footsteps pacing back and forth. The roof groaned under its weight. "Jessica," whispered, burying her face in her hands. Then, silence. For several agonizing minutes, no one moved. The only sound was their labored breathing. Mike finally whispered, "Maybe it left?" A loud crash interrupted him as one of the windows shattered. The creature's clawed hand shot through, swiping at the air, its glowing eyes visible just beyond the broken frame. Rachel screamed, lunging forward to strike at the hand with her knife. The blade connected, and the beast roared in pain, retreating momentarily. "We can't stay here," Jessica shrieked. "We need a plan," Rachel said, her voice shrieking but resolute and fast. As the growls continued outside, Rachel's frantic search of the cabin revealed a dusty journal hidden beneath a floorboard. The cover was warped and stained, but the pages inside were surprisingly intact. "Someone's been here before," she said, flipping through the brittle pages. "What does it say?" Mike asked, his eyes darting toward the door, which creaked under the weight of the creature's relentless pounding. The journal detailed the account of a previous group of hikers who had stumbled into Black Hollow and encountered the same monster. The writer described it as a Wendigo, a being from Native American folklore. Starved for flesh and driven by an insatiable hunger, the Wendigo hunted those who trespassed in its territory. Rachel's hands trembled as she read aloud. "Fire is its only weakness. A flame can drive it back or even destroy it. But beware. Its rage only grows the more it is wounded." Jessica's face was pale. "Fire? That's all we have." Rachel held up the kerosene lamp. "We make torches. It's our only shot." Liam nodded. "If it's fire it fears, then we fight it with fire." The pounding on the door grew louder, the wood splintering under the weight of the beast's assault. "We don't have much time," Rachel said, stuffing strips of cloth into the lamp's kerosene reservoir. The door exploded inward, sending shards of wood flying across the room. The Wendigo stepped inside, its hulking form filling the doorway. Its glowing eyes scanned the cabin, locking on to the group. "Now!" Rachel shouted. Liam charged forward, swinging his burning torch at the creature. The flames licked at its matted fur, and it recoiled with a screech. Rachel and Jessica flanked it, waving their torches to keep it at bay. The Wendigo snarled, its claws slashing through the air. It struck Mike, sending him sprawling across the floor. Blood seeped from a gash in his side, but he gritted his teeth and pushed himself up, determined to fight. Rachel lunged, thrusting her torch toward the beast's face. It roared in fury, swiping at her with one massive hand. The blow sent her crashing into the wall, but her torch had done its job. The creature's face was scorched, its flesh bubbling and oozing. Jessica, trembling but determined, grabbed the kerosene lamp. "Take this!" she screamed, hurling it at the Wendigo. The lamp shattered against its chest, igniting its fur in a burst of flames. The Wendigo thrashed wildly, its screams shaking the walls of the cabin. "Out!" Liam shouted. "Get out, now!" The three of them scrambled out of the cabin as the creature flailed, its burning form lighting up the night. They didn't stop running until the sun began to rise, its golden light filtering through the trees. Rachel and Jessica half-carried Mike, his steps growing weaker with every mile. His wound was deep, but the bleeding had slowed. When they finally stumbled onto a dirt road, a truck appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the early morning mist. The driver, an older man with a grizzled beard, slammed on the brakes and jumped out. "What in God's name happened to you kids? Get us out of here!" Rachel gasped. "Please!" As the truck rumbled away from the forest, Jessica glanced back. The trees stood silent, bathed in sunlight. But then she saw it. Deep in the shadows, just beyond the tree line, a pair of glowing red eyes watched them leave. "Drive faster," she whispered, her voice trembling. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "You kids were lucky. Not everyone gets out of Black Hollow alive." Jessica shivered, clutching her arms as the forest faded into the distance. They had survived, but the memory of the Wendigo's snarls and the glow of its eyes would haunt them forever.